Section 22 of From the Tower Window of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, go to LibriVox.org. Recording by Mary Schneider. From the Tower Window of My Book House. Edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. Coaly-Bay, the Outlaw Horse, by Ernest Thompson Seton. 5 years ago, in the Bitterroot Mountains of Idaho, there was a beautiful little foal. His coat was bright bay. His legs, mane, and tail were glossy black, coal black, and bright bay, so they named him Coaly-Bay. Coaly-Bay sounds like Coaly-Bay, which is an Arab title of nobility, and those who saw the handsome colt and did not know how he came by the name thought he must be of Arab blood. No doubt he was, in a faraway sense, just as all best horses have Arab blood, and once in a while it seems to come out strong and show in every part of the creature, in his frame, his power, and his wild, free, roving spirit. Coaly-Bay loved to race like the wind. He gloried in his speed, his tireless legs, and when careering with the herd of colts he met a fence or a ditch, it was as natural to Coaly-Bay to overleap it as it was the others to sheer off. So he grew up strong of limb, restless of spirit, and rebellious at any thought of restraint. Even the kindly curb of the hay yard or the stable was unwelcome, and he soon showed that he would rather stand out all night in a driving storm than be locked in a comfortable stall where he had no vestige of the liberty he loved so well. He became very clever at dodging the horse wrangler, whose job it was to bring the horse herd to the corral. The very sight of that man set Coaly-Bay a-going. He became what is known as a quit the bunch, that is, a horse of such independent mind that he will go his own way the moment he does not like the way of the herd. So each month the colt became more set in living free, and more cunning in the means he took to win his way. When he was 3 years old, just in the perfection of his young strength and beauty, his real troubles began, for now his owner undertook to break him to ride. He was as tricky and vicious as he was handsome, and the first day's experience was a terrible battle between the horse trainer and the beautiful colt. But the man was skillful. He knew how to apply his power, and all the wild plungings, bucking, rearing, and rolling of the wild one had no desirable result. With all his strength, the horse was hopelessly helpless in the hands of the skillful horseman, and Coaly-Bay was so far mastered at length that a good rider could use him. But each time the saddle went on, he made a new fight. After a few months of this, the colt seemed to realize that it was useless to resist. It simply won for him lashings and spurrings, so he pretended to reform. For a week he was ridden each day, and not once did he buck, but on the last day he came home lame. His owner turned him out to pasture. 3 days later he seemed all right. He was caught and saddled. He did not buck, but within 5 minutes he went lame as before. Again he was turned out to pasture, and after a week saddled, only to go lame again. His owner did not know what to think, whether the horse really had a lame leg or was only shamming. But he took the first chance to get rid of him, and though Coaly-Bay was easily worth $50, he sold him for $25. The new owner felt he had a bargain, but after being ridden half a mile, Coaly-Bay went lame. The rider got off to examine the foot, whereupon Coaly-Bay broke away and galloped back to his old pasture. Here he was caught, and the new owner, being neither gentle nor sweet, applied spur without mercy, so that the next 20 miles was covered in less than 2 hours, and no sign of lameness appeared. Now they were at the ranch of this new owner. Coaly-Bay was led from the door of the house to the pasture, limping all the way, and then turned out. He limped over to the other horses. On one side of the pasture was the garden of a neighbor. This man was very proud of his fine vegetables, and had put a 6-foot fence around the place. Yet the very night after Coaly-Bay arrived, certain of the horses got into the garden somehow, and did a great deal of damage. But they leaped out before daylight, and no one saw them. The gardener was furious, but the ranchman stoutly maintained that it must have been some other horses, since his were behind a 6-foot fence. Next night it happened again. The ranchman went out very early and saw all his horses in the pasture, with Coaly-Bay behind them. His lameness seemed worse now instead of better. In a few days, however, the horse was seen walking all right, so the ranchman's son caught him and tried to ride him. But this seemed too good a chance to lose. All his old wickedness returned to the horse. The boy was bucked off at once. The ranchman himself now leaped into the saddle. Coaly-Bay bucked for 10 minutes, but finding he could not throw the man, he tried to crush his leg against a post. But the rider guarded himself well. Coaly-Bay reared and threw himself backward. The rider slipped off, the horse fell, jarring heavily, and before he could rise, the man was in the saddle again. The horse now ran away, plunging and bucking. He stopped short, but the rider did not go over his head, so Coaly-Bay turned and seized the man's foot in his teeth. It was quite clear now that Coaly-Bay was an outlaw, that is, an incurably vicious horse. The saddle was jerked off, and he was driven, limping, into the pasture. The raids on the garden continued, and the two men began to quarrel over it. But to prove that his horses were not guilty, the ranchman asked the gardener to sit up with him and watch. That night, as the moon was brightly shining, they saw, not all the horses, but Coaly-Bay, walk straight up to the garden fence. No sign of a limp now. Easily leap over it, and proceed to gobble the finest things he could find. After they had made sure of his identity, the men ran forward. Coaly-Bay cleared the fence like a deer, lightly raced over the pasture to mix with the horse herd, and when the men came near him, he had, oh, such an awful limp. "That settles it," said the rancher. "He's a fraud, but he's a beauty, and good stuff, too." "Yes, but it settles who took my garden truck," said the other. "Wall, I suppose so," was the answer. "But look-a-here, neighbor, you ain't lost more'n $10 in truck. That horse is easy worth $100. Give me $25, take the horse, and call it square." "Not much I will," said the gardener. "I'm out $25 worth of truck. The horse ain't worth a cent more. I take him and call it even." And so the thing was settled. The ranchman said nothing about Coaly-Bay being vicious as well as cunning, but the gardener found out, the very first time he tried to ride him, that the horse was as bad as he was beautiful. Next day a sign appeared on the gardener's gate: "For sale, first-class horse, sound and gentle, $10." Now at this time a band of hunters came riding by. There were 3 mountaineers, 2 men from the city, and the writer of this story. The city men were going to hunt bear. They had guns and everything needed for bear hunting except bait. It is usual to buy some worthless horse or cow, drive it into the mountains where the bears are, and kill it there. So seeing the sign up, the hunters called to the gardener, "Haven't you got a cheaper horse?" The gardener replied, "Look at him there. Ain't he a beauty? You won't find a cheaper horse if you travel 1,000 miles. "We are looking for an old bear bait, and $5 is our limit," replied the hunter. Horses are cheap and plentiful in that country. Buyers were scarce. The gardener feared that Coaly-Bay would escape. "Wall, if that's the best you can do, he's yourn." The hunter handed him $5, then said, "Now, stranger, the bargain's settled. Will you tell me why you sell this fine horse for $5? "Mighty simple. He can't be rode. He's dead lame when he's going your way, and sound as a dollar going his own. No fence in the country can hold him. He's a dangerous outlaw. He's wickeder nor Old Nick." "Well, he's an almighty handsome bear bait." And the hunters rode on. Coaly-Bay was driven with the pack horses, and limped dreadfully on the trail. Once or twice he tried to go back, but he was easily turned by the men behind him. His limp grew worse, and toward night it was painful to see him. The leading guide remarked, "That there limp ain't no fake. He's got some deep-seated trouble." Day after day the hunters rode farther into the mountains, driving the horses along and hobbling them at night. Coaly-Bay went with the rest, limping along, tossing his head and his long splendid mane at every step. One of the hunters tried to ride him, and nearly lost his life, for the horse seemed possessed of a demon as soon as the man was on his back. The road grew harder as it rose. A very bad bog had to be crossed one day. Several horses were mired in it, and as the men rushed to the rescue, Coaly-Bay saw his chance to escape. He wheeled in a moment and turned himself from a limping, low-headed, sorry, bad-eyed creature into a high-spirited horse. Head and tail aloft now, shaking their black streamers in the wind, he gave a joyous neigh, and without a trace of lameness dashed for his home 100 miles away, threading each narrow trail with perfect certainty, though he had seen them but once before. In a few minutes he had steamed away from their sight. The men were furious, but one of them, saying not a word, leaped on his horse. To do what? Follow that free-ranging racer? Sheer folly. Oh, no, he knew a better plan. He knew the country. 2 miles around by the trail, half a mile by the rough cut-off that he took, was Panther Gap. The runaway must pass through that, and Coaly-Bay raced down the trail to find the guide below, awaiting him. Tossing his head with anger, he wheeled up on the trail again, and within a few yards recovered his monotonous limp and his evil expression. So he was driven into camp. This was bear country, and the hunters resolved to end his dangerous pranks and make him useful for once. They dared not catch him, it was not really safe to go near him, but 2 of the guides drove him to a distant glade where bears abounded. A thrill of pity came over me as I saw that beautiful, untamable creature going away with his imitation limp. "Ain't you coming along?" called the guide. "No, I don't want to see him die," was the answer. 15 minutes later a distant rifle crack was heard, and in my mind's eye I saw that proud head and those superb limbs, robbed of their sustaining, indomitable spirit, falling flat and limp, to suffer the unsightly end of fleshly things. Poor Coaly-Bay! He would not bear the yoke. Rebellious to the end, he had fought against the fate of all his kind. It seemed to me the spirit of an eagle or of a wolf it was that dwelt behind those full bright eyes, that ordered all his wayward life. I tried to put the tragic finish out of mind, and had not long to battle with the thought, not even 1 short hour, for the men came back. Down the long trail to the west they had driven him. There was no chance for him to turn aside. He must go on, and the men behind felt safe in that. Farther away from his old home on the Bitterroot River he had gone each time he journeyed. And now he had passed the high divide and was keeping the narrow trail that leads to the Valley of Bears and on to the Salmon River, and still away to the open wild Columbian plains, limping sadly as though he knew. His glossy hide flashed back the golden sunlight, still richer than it fell, and the men behind followed like hangmen in the death train of a nobleman condemned, down the narrow trail till it opened into a little beaver meadow, with rank, rich grass, a lovely mountain stream, and winding bear paths up and down the waterside. "Guess this'll do," said the older man. "Well, here goes for a sure death or a clean miss," said the other confidently, and waiting till the limper was out in the middle of the meadow, he gave a short, sharp whistle. Instantly Coaly-Bay was alert. He swung and faced his tormentors, his noble head erect, his nostrils flaring, a picture of horse beauty, yes, of horse perfection. The rifle was leveled, the very brain its mark, just on the cross line of the eyes and the ears that meant sure, sudden, painless death. It was sudden death or miss, and the marksman missed. Away went the wild horse at his famous best, not for his eastern home, but down the unknown western trail, away and away. The pine woods hid him from the view, and left behind was the rifleman vainly trying to force the empty cartridge from his gun. Down that trail with an inborn certainty he went, and on through the pines that leaped a great bog, and splashed an hour later through the limpid clear water, and on responsive to some unknown guide that subtly called him from the farthest west. And so he went, till the dwindling pines gave place to scrubby cedars, and these in turn were mixed with sage, and onward still till the far-away flat plains of Salmon River were about him. And ever on, tireless as it seemed, he went, and crossed the canyon of the mighty Snake, and up again to the high wild plains where the wire fence still is not, and on beyond the buffalo hump, till moving specks on the far horizon caught his eager eyes, and coming on and near, they moved and rushed aside to wheel and face about. He lifted up his voice and called to them, the long shrill neigh of his kindred when they bugled to each other on the far Chaldean plain, and back their answer came. This way and that they wheeled and sped and caracoled, and Coaly-Bay drew nearer, called and gave these countersigns his kindred know, till this they were assured: he was their kind. He was of the wild free blood that man hath never tamed. And when the night came down on the purpling plain, his place was in the herd as one who after many a long hard journey in the dark had found his home. There you may see him yet, for still his strength endures and his beauty is not less. The riders tell me they have seen him many times by Cedra. He is swift and strong among the swift ones, but it is that flowing mane and tail that mark him chiefly from afar. There on the wild free plains of sage he lives. The storm wind smites his glossy coat at night, and the winter snows are driven hard on him at times. The wolves are there to harry all the weak ones of the herd, and in the spring the mighty grizzly too may come to claim his toll. There are no luscious pastures made by man, no grain foods, nothing but the wild hard hay, the wind, and the open plains. But here at last he found the thing he craved, the one worth all the rest. Long may he roam. This is my wish, and this, that I may see him once again in all the glory of his speed, with his black mane on the wind, the spur galls gone from his flanks, and in his eye the blazing light that grew in his far-off forebears' eyes as they spurned Arabian plains to leave behind the racing wild beast and the fleet gazelle. Yes, too, the driving sandstorm that overwhelmed the rest, but strove in vain on the dusty wake of the desert's highest born. The story of Coaly-Bay is in the main true, and a recent letter from the West gives me new light on the history of the wild horse. The letter runs as follows: January 26, 1916. I too knew Coaly-Bay, the glorious creature. He began his struggles in the Bitterroot Mountains of Idaho, left through the Salmon River country straggling tales of his fierce resentment under the yoke, and escaped triumphantly at last to the plains in the south. I was 16 then, and it is 6 years ago. Something, however, you failed to record. It is this: that before he escaped from the world of spur and lash, the world of compulsion, the world that denies to a horse an end in himself, he came to love one person, me. The woman who petted instead of saddled him, who gave him sugar instead of spurring him, who gloried in him because he dared assert that he belonged to himself. When I wandered joyfully through the evergreen labyrinths of the Florence basin, sniffing like a hare or fox the damp spring smell of the earth, going far down the narrow rock-walled canyons for the first wild orchids, Coaly-Bay came too. I did not ride or drive him. He trotted beside me as might a dog. We were pals, equals. I went with him where he could find the first young meadow grass, and he went with me where grew the first wild strawberries. As together we glimpsed far below the green ribbon that was the Salmon River, or saw far off the snow attempting to cover the sinister blackness of the Buffalo Hump, we laughed at the stupidity of the world of man, who sought to drive things, to compel things, to master things, breeding hate and viciousness thereby. The stupidity of the world of men who never dreamed of the marvelous power of love. Yes, always I shall love the memory of Coaly-Bay. He was a symbol of the eternal spirit of revolt against the spur of oppression. End of Coaly-Bay, the Outlaw Horse.